Like many of you, I keep a calendar on my desk that reminds me of appointments, of meetings, baptisms, and the Sundays that I'm scheduled to preach the homily. Well, as I glanced at the date for this Sunday, the 24th of June, I thought, wow, almost half the year has gone by. And oh yeah, 6 months from today is Christmas. I thought that would give a little gasp, a good gasp. But it's hard to think of that after we have just had the summer solstice this week, and our thoughts are about vacations, beaches, sailing, picnics, and hopefully, if the weather cooperates, lots and lots of sunscreen. Not today. However, we now start the journey to the distant star of winter and the nativity of the Lord. But today, on this feast day, we encounter another miraculous infant, the one who will grow up to prepare the way of the Lord. I remember listening to a CD years ago by the Venerable Fulton J. Sheen. Now, Bishop Sheen, for those of you of a certain age, would remember that he had a TV show back in the 50s and 60s, and I believe into the early 70s, called Life is Worth Living. Hard to believe that in those days, a show on Catholicism and faith was a #1 show. So that shows you how far afield TV has become. But on this one occasion, he spoke on how many times Jesus was pre-announced in the Old Testament. I didn't know. And he asked the question, how many times do you think that was? So my mind was racing. Oh, how many times do you think it was? Maybe 50, 75, 80, I don't know. But when he said that it was 456 times throughout Scripture, I was baffled and blown away, really. So from that we can obviously deduce that the coming of the Messiah was not a random event, but was truly part of God's divine plan. And so it was too with John the Baptist. So today is a phenomenal feast and a rare one. Only 3 times during the calendar year does the church celebrate a birthday. For Jesus, for his mother, and for John the Baptist. The Baptist is in illustrious company, and this serves to remind us just how important he is to our salvation history. When you consider the circumstances, this nativity is full of mystery, very much similar to that of Jesus. There was an angel who announced it. There were parents who had not planned it, and the name of the child was chosen by God. One of the remarkable moments in today's gospel is that Elizabeth, she defies family tradition to name her son, not Zachariah after his father, but to state, he will be called John. And yes, even her husband, when he's queried, and whose tongue has now been loosened, speaks this. His name is John. Now, the name John is an ancient one. In Hebrew, it is filled with richness and with meaning. Both Elizabeth and Zachariah knew that. And for us, that is so as well. As the gospel indicates, the name is not an accident. It was announced by the angel Gabriel, and its meaning serves to send a message into the world. Some translations have it as gift of God or graced by God. One translation that is particularly beautiful is God is gracious. and in giving an aging couple a new life, God is gracious. To making what seemed impossible possible, in working miracles where we least expect them, God is gracious. In offering us the most precious and what seems for so many of us an elusive thing, hope. And so it was that before John ever uttered a word, with only his name and being blessed in his mother's womb, when he was in the presence of the Lord at the visitation, he knew the hope that was to come with the Christ. Here we are, all of us generations upon generations later, and how desperately we need to hear it today. Hope. The times we live in are numbing and at times dispiriting. We need only to look at the evening news and the many forms of media. In a time of what seems like total inhumanity of people to people, mudslinging politics, economic turmoils, and even in our local communities that are tainted by poverty, by hunger, attacks on the family, and in recent days in the news in this local area on religion itself. But despite all this, all the hardships and the trials, God remains the constant with us, and His grace sustains us. We are reminded that this Sunday we come to a turning point in the liturgical calendar. The feast is one of the oldest in the church, and one that comes right in the middle of our calendar, and for good reason. As John the Baptist is a pivotal point where our attention turns. He is the forerunner of our faith, the last prophet of the Old Covenant, and the bridge to the New. I have heard it said that John the Baptist was the doorway through which humanity was able to enter into the Christian life by preparing us. John opened the eyes and ears of the world to possibility. He made us ready for Christ. Consider what was meant for us and how the forerunner of the Messiah was also the forerunner of all that we do here today. He prepared the way of the Lord, and He prepared us for what would follow. Beyond being a prophet, a martyr, and a saint, John the Baptist was one of God's gifts to a world in need of transformation, a sign to us of our Father's generous love for His children, and for optimism and a reason for hope. John was directed by divine will. He knew what he had to do, and he did it with great zeal and love. He knew that he had human limitations. He was to make the path smooth and straight for the one who would come to save us from the darkness of sin, by the one who is the light of peace and salvation. John would decrease so the Lord would increase. He was obedient and lived and delivered the plan given him. It is written by the prophet Jeremiah that God has a plan for each one of us, every one of us here, for all of you, for me, for all. We can learn from John's love and devotion because God is gracious.